Hello and welcome to another happy, splendid, marvelous edition of the After Party. I'm No White Guilt, and with me is the Great Order. The Honors Roll Call highlights and celebrates those who have conscientiously committed to monthly subscription investments, gifts in my work for White Wellbeing. And appearing on the Honors Roll Call today are the Good Girl and Johnny. I appreciate your support and sense of moral responsibility to White Wellbeing. Folks, we all know who HB 2014 is, but do we all follow him and retweet everything that he tweets? We should. If you're not following him, do so now at _HB 2014. And let's make sure that we turn HB into the one and only Twitter Titan. As for the crown winner of last week, the crown goes to somebody who you'll just never guess. Roy Danton for gifting a total of $100. Thank you, and congratulations to you, dear brother. In second place was Ryan, gifting $92. Thank you, and congratulations as well. Gift us on Entropy at 15%, which will be open in just a moment, where you can also watch the streams, and if I decide to put any posts up, you all can participate in those posts. You can also gift us on Ko-fi at 15% and Cash App at 6%. Today we're getting tapped into the one and only Rachel Summers. Rachel, please introduce yourself to the audience and tell us where they can find you and your marvelous work. And then we will hand it right over to the one and only Mr. George.
Hey everybody, you can find me in all the usual places. Start with Twitter, it's SummerSoleil156, and on Facebook, Rachel Summers. You should be able to find that pretty easy. If you type in Rachel Summers literature, you'll probably avoid the X-Men references because that does come up sometimes. I didn't know this, but hey, I'm apparently a character. It's fun. I have action figures.
Alrighty.
Twitter and Facebook, those are the usual places. I also have a page on Amazon where you can get my books.
So you're good on the merch. You already have action figures. That's good. You're ahead of the curve. And yeah, we'll have the mods put Twitter links in the description, and we'll make sure to say it again for anyone listening on podcast. Now, you actually helped us open up 2019. You were our first guest last January in 2019. So please go check out that tap if anyone is interested to hear more from Rachel after listening today. But we've done a lot since then. Actually, last week we were just celebrating our 2-year anniversary, as you may know. And we have a lot of new people with us. So if you want to take a moment or two in this beginning to introduce yourself, your writings, your background, before we get into today's topics.
I am about to release my 5th novel, which is what we're talking about today. I also have 3 nonfiction works. I'll have one more book after this next one that'll wrap up the series. And let's see, as far as real life goes, I have 2 sons who are very mischievous and normal in a good way. If they were gods, they would be Thor and Loki. Let me just put it that way. That's what I'm dealing with. I have a dog laying over there. She'll probably start snoring. So if you hear weird noises, it's not me. It's the dog. And the cat may break something during the process of recording. But that's about it. That's my life in a nutshell.
And a little about your background in academia and going rogue, because that was an interesting part of our conversation last time.
Yes.
I was right there, poised to get a PhD, and I just couldn't do what they were asking me to do. They wanted me in a box, and I'm just not a box person, so I left. That's the short version of the story. I felt like students should get out of their desk and actually do things, and also the disciplines should talk to one another and try to figure out things that are actually going on in the world and not just within the ivory tower. And somehow that's blasphemy. And they won't let you do that, which is funny, though, because in the past 10 years, you've had physics and religion increasingly crossing the divide and talking to each other, which is what I was trying to get them to do in the first place. But it's happening, whether you like it or not, it's happening.
So, and what, again, we go more into this in her episode. You could go search on theafterparty.tv or our respective websites, type in Rachel Summers and find it in the catalog. But again, just in terms of introductions, what were you pursuing before you dropped out of the PhD program?
My major or my degree is in medieval studies, which encompasses comparative religions, history, and English lit. Now that came along with, of course, a philosophy master's degree, and I was going to go on from that, mixing everything together in kind of an alchemical mess and come up with a PhD that I could actually use. But it didn't work out that way. My whole thesis was, it's hard to put this into a few words that can be understood. This is why I need 1,000 pages. You take like the seedy underbelly of society, if you will. Back in the Middle Ages, it would have been your outlaws who were living out in the forests. They would literally wear the head of the wolf. There's a phrase, caput gerat lupinum. He who wears the head of the wolf, he has a target on his back. Quite literally, it's perfectly legal to kill these people. Now today, that would transfer into like your biker culture, your outlaws, your rebels, your loners, weirdos, whatever you want to call them. But if we don't have this to compare normal society against, there is no normal society. So you need that seedy underbelly, if you will, to have something to define yourself against. So that was kind of my whole spiel, was the witches and the outlaws and the outcasts are what make normal society normal, if you will.
And you wanted to explore that in your dissertation.
Yes.
Yeah, and they didn't like that.
No.
Well, we're glad that you went your own way and that you're here now. So 5 books now, and Forsaken is the one that we'll be focusing on today, getting into language. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Forsaken and what you would hope people to walk away with it after reading it? Walk away from mixing up my prepositions.
No. The gist of the story, to put it very briefly, is about the emptiness and rootlessness of modern society, how we got here, and what can we do to get out of this mess.
Everyone's favorite topic.
Yes.
You're right. It's endless. But the root and the rootlessness thing comes into big play here. It looms large. Because if you don't have that root base, if you're not well rooted, literally, you are going to get jerked around like a puppet. And, let's say a storm comes along. Which are the trees that get blown down? The ones without a strong root base, of course. Yep. So this is why it's crucial to have those roots. And the roots can be found in mythology, folklore, history, honest history, which is hard to come by these days. Your tribal past, your racial past, any of these things are roots. And those are being dug up, hacked away, and just tossed to the 4 winds daily in our modern world. And it's a huge problem. If you picture modernity as a storm, like metaphorically, we're in quite a mess right now. But if you've got roots, you're going to weather the storm. And even the worst storms passes within a few minutes. Like, think of a tornado when it blows through. If you've ever been in a tornado, it's horrible, but it's 30 seconds and it's gone. And the trees without roots, they're laying on their side. The trees with good roots are still there. A few branches here and there, maybe, but they're still there. So you've got to have your roots.
Yep.
That's why it's important. And as far as what you walk away with after reading the book, I want people to have a scrambled brain. I mean that as nicely as possible. Like, if you think of this in alchemical terms, you have the phrase solve a coagula. That's the breaking down into smaller pieces, dissecting, if you will, analyzing something, boiling it down, and then letting it build back up into something better, hopefully. And that's what this book is the breaking down process. The next book will be the putting back together.
So you want to blow some minds?
Yes.
All right.
Really, you're going to be left with more questions than answers. But think about questions leads to quest, which leads to wanderings, and the whole book is a pilgrimage. The whole series is really a pilgrimage of like the human soul through a very messed up world.
So is Forsaken the first in the series, or is it already?
Forsaken is the 5th.
Oh, all of these are. I didn't know they were all directly connected. Okay.
They're very loosely connected. You can read any of them and still know what's going on, but it helps to at least read the back of the other 4 before you get started.
I think
it doesn't really matter what order you read them in. It might be fun to read them backwards. I don't know.
I hope. Well, that might blow your mind even more.
Yeah.
Point.
But then you're going from bad to worse rather than, I mean, not bad to worse. You're going from almost getting out of this mess to going back to the beginning of the mess, and nobody wants to do that.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Sucked back into the quicksand.
Right.
Well, I'm tempted, and maybe we can shelve this. I don't know. I have to mention it though. I'm tempted to ask you, since you said real history, where you go to find real history. Maybe we can weave that in. Just keep that kind of on the side, but I think we should get into the book.
Here.
Let's keep it on the side.
You've got to bypass your modern academic sources, which I call just alphabet soup vomit. That's what a lot of professors do now.
It's a technical term.
And then they want to write a book about the book they just read, but there's no new ideas there. They're just interpreting something that they've read. It's like these guys here, these old books, that's where you want to go. Like if you're studying the Crusades, for example. Let me find, hold on. Where is this crazy book? Isn't it? This was written by people who lived through it. That's what you want to read. So if you want to learn about the Crusades, why not read the letters and memoirs and diary entries of the people who lived through it, rather than some guy sitting in an office somewhere who read that but maybe doesn't like this or that idea, so he uses language, there we go, to manipulate what you're going to learn about it.
Yeah, so you're big on primary sources or getting as close to the event as can. Yeah.
If you can, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, of course. Ash Donaldson.
Learn from the guy who lived through it.
Yeah, Ash Donaldson, another creative author, contributing a lot to our scene. Been on this show a couple of times. Has the same exact take on that. He also has an academic background as well. Is that Mike all right?
Yeah. Cool.
All right. So we can get into the book. So you have a main female character. I'm sure. Well, curious how much is based on you. You could tell us that. But in this book, Forsaken, she encounters 7 saviors. That sounds kind of like that wasn't random. So why 7? Why saviors? What are you trying to demonstrate by having her encounter these mythical figures from different world religions?
7 is a number that pops up over and over again in religious texts and even folklore, fairy tales, etc. Snow White has 7 dwarfs. She doesn't have 6 or 8, just 7. There's 7 days in creation. There's 7 colors in the rainbow. The 7 just pops up again and again and again. And also the number 7 is a combination of 3 and 4. 3 being a symbol of the spiritual, while 4 is the material. So right there, 7 is a number that represents duality, which is a huge factor in the way our world is set up. Because you have the material on one hand and the spiritual on the other, the masculine and the feminine, the right and the left, and everywhere you look, there's a dualism. And that's encompassed by the number 7. Also, just honestly, it sounds good with Savior because there's the S and the V repeated. And this brings you back to alliteration and rhythm and how that's important in language and poetry in particular and song. It sticks in your head longer. And it kind of becomes more of a part of who you are if you can remember it. And it's a lot easier to remember something that has a pattern and a rhythm.
Mm-hmm. Almost reminds me of the 7 sisters of the Pleiades star system. That's something that people assign a lot of significance to. So what about the saviors then? What is her, if you could, I mean, we're going to get more into the specifics as we go on, but why the saviors, or what was the framing of these figures from religions?
I use different figures from different religions to critique what's going on in the world. Like you have Mithras, you have Mohammed, Moses, who else is in there? Shiva. There's a modern day Jesus. The first 2 saviors she encounters, the first and the last are real men. The 5 in between are figments, I guess, hallucinations maybe, that she has in the desert. And I leave it up to the reader to decide if this actually happened, if she's having a heat stroke. Who knows what's going on? I mean, there's a fine line between madness and inspiration. We know that. And if you read some of the old prophets, they were not sane by modern standards, not in the least. But inspired? Sure. So it's up to the reader to decide if those 5 in the middle actually appeared to her or not. And ultimately, it doesn't matter. I use them as a voice to discuss what's going on in the world with a particular religion or a particular ideology, because it's much easier to critique something from within the tradition than from without.
Mm-hmm.
So there are lenses for these different points you want to make. Yeah.
Right.
Now, the big thing that we're here to talk about is language. You sent us a lot of juicy tidbits about language and critique of language, specifically the written word. Now, as someone who was pursuing a doctorate in higher education, you would think, oh, you're someone that loves language, you dealt in language, you write a lot. So how is someone like you who deals with language at the same time critiquing language? What are your critiques of the written word and its limits and what it's done to us?
That's a huge thing. The written word has allowed us to become lazy. Just to be blunt about it, you have the written word that you can very superficially skim in a passive manner. Then you have active engagement with the text, and from there you go on to lived experience. We're skipping those last parts, and we're just reading a book for entertainment while we're on the beach or whatever. Pick up a paperback in the airport because you forgot to bring one with you. It's not becoming a part of who you are. It's not important anymore. It's just entertainment. It's something that can easily be wiped away. Now, if like I have a stack of books that are about hiking and waterfalls and different parks and places to go in the lower Appalachian Mountains, I can read those books all day about every single waterfall here. But until I put them down and go to that waterfall, it doesn't really matter a whole lot. So that's the part that we're missing. Reading is supposed to be part of a much greater process, but we're leaving out the rest of it. And then you also have the whole double-edged sword idea. And if you go back to Egyptian mythology, you have the ibis-headed god Thoth, who invents writing and gives it to man. And he shows the other gods, and they're like, oh, dude, what have you done? You screwed up. All the humans are going to be stupid now. And that's pretty much what happened. It gets a lot more complicated than that, and I'm sure we'll get to it, but that's the short version of why writing is bad. It allows us to be passive.
So your waterfall example is interesting because that's a little simpler for people to wrap their heads around, I think. So you could get a hiking guide and you could say, well, the utility of the guide is that it's a reference and you can then know what's in your region for you and your family to go enjoy.
Right.
But it doesn't really fulfill its purpose until you go out and you go enjoy that scenery, like you just said.
Mm.
Okay.
Exactly.
So if we extrapolate that into something a little more nebulous, what is literature supposed to be then? What is good nonfiction writing that makes us frame the world in new ways or have language? Jason and I deal with that a lot, giving verbiage, language to things so people can understand and deal with the world around them. So what is, if that next step, completing the process in the hiking guide, is actually going to the waterfall, what is completing the process of reading a work of literature or reading something nonfiction that's inspiring or edifying? What are a lot of people missing? What do they need to do after they read?
A lot of people, like, say your average college student will read this or that famous book because it's assigned to them and no other reason. And they learn what they need to learn to pass a test and get a piece of paper. And that's it. It never becomes a part of who they are. If you take a text and you see it as part preservation and part inspiration, it becomes a stepping stone to get somewhere else. If you're just reading it for entertainment or a grade, it never becomes that stepping stone. It's completely incidental.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also think of the written word, modern terms, like as an external hard drive. You put your history on that as a backup in case of emergency. This can be to preserve the past. It can be to preserve your stories, whatever. But it's not supposed to be the be-all, end-all of experience. You take that and you go somewhere else with it. But we're not doing that part. We're just reading for the hell of it, or we're just doing it for a grade or maybe entertainment. And it's not becoming a part of our lived experience. And that's the key. It needs to become a part of lived experience. And I think that right there is the main difference between an oral story and a written story. Let's say you remember certain stories that your mom told you, and every time you hear that story, you go back to your childhood bedroom in your mind. It becomes a part of who you are. That place and that story are tied together. And that again brings up roots. We have our stories within our certain cultures, and the more we hear those, the more we're brought back to that place and that time and those people that we were with. Like, say you are taking a hike and you're trying to learn a poem or a song or something like that. Well, every time after you've committed that to memory, you're going to remember exactly where you were when you learned it. That's the difference between just reading a book and actually imbibing something and let it becoming a part of who you are.
How much of this do you lay at the feet of the written word, and how much of it do you lay at the feet of a modern consciousness? A couple of hundred years ago, when people were reading literature, early 1800s, do you think, I mean, I don't know if you've studied this or not, if there's a way to know, but was there a greater propensity for them to be using that literature to inspire their own life, to live in a more beautiful way, or to apply a philosophy to their life? Do you see there being a shift in how people use this, how it became more passive?
I think then, like now, it depends on the individual reading the book. You can have your active readers and you have your passive readers. That's always been the case. I think now we've got more literacy, but it's a lower level of literacy. Whereas maybe in ages past, fewer people read, but they were much more involved in what they were reading, and they were reading perhaps much higher brow material. I don't know if that's because today anybody can just self-publish a book, and we've got, of course, the advent of the printing press, and there's crap newspapers on every corner. So maybe it's just more readily available to read the lowbrow material, but I don't know. I like to think that our ancestors were a little bit more sophisticated than that. Maybe I'm being an idealist. I don't know.
I think there are two levels there too. It's the ability to understand words, to be able to read. I guess to be literate and numerate. We seem to be losing in both areas as societally.
Mm-hmm.
But also what you're speaking to there is not just that the superficial mechanical ability of being able to read, but it's the you and Jared are both talking about the actual engagement. And if you read a text, say it's a book say it's like it's Go Free, and you think you're just going to read it and you're going to suddenly be better without actually engaging the text, doing the exercises, thinking through the processes, then you've done nothing, because you've just read over, you've just gone through a mechanical process. And so that's what you're saying with your works here, is that if people are just reading through it and not engaging with it, thinking about it in their lives and how it applies to them now and to questions in the future as well, then they've really accomplished nothing. It's certainly nothing that you intended to accomplish. Is that right?
Yes, and I don't think that's always an intentional thing. How many times have we been reading a book and our mind wanders, we space out, we've read 2 pages and don't even know what we just read. Yeah. It happens all the time. I am constantly having to back up, and it helps to get your brain back on track to start reading out loud for a minute. Mm-hmm. Then you start engaging with the text more. But it happens to everybody. You're reading, and your brain starts wondering, what do you have to do tomorrow? Yeah. Blah, blah, blah. Did I remember to get the clothes out of the dryer? And before you know it, you're 3 pages later and you don't know what you've read.
Yes. Well, I mean, isn't that a great example, too, of the fact that just being able to read and go through the words is just a mechanical process that requires no conscious involvement?
Like driving.
Yes.
How many times you've been driving and you get where you're going and you're like, what just happened? I'm here. Or you drive past your exit and just la la la. La, la, la.
So I'm going to ask it again and return to the theme that I was getting at, but ask it in a bit of a different way. What it sounds to me is like we might be able to couch this under the category of consumerism, and that too many people today have a checklist approach to life. I could say, oh, I read that. I have that bit of information. I read that too. I can make an intelligent comment about it in a chat or at a cocktail party. And we just want to acquire little bits of information. Oh, I read this. I know that reference. I know that bit of information. And to use an overused metaphor, but it's apt and it's not without reference, would be we're becoming more like computers in that sense. We're just, like you said, just download it into my brain. I want to consume it. The experiential, I think, is what you're saying is being cut out. And that is, I mean, to me, I've spoken about this a bit. The root, that is the heart of the hydra of all of these different manifestations that we can point to, that modernity has, all these negative things that we could critique. The heart of it is as a siloed off consciousness. The different parts of ourselves, different parts of our brains aren't like a web communicating with one another and forming a holistic system, that everything's kind of chopped up and everyone's very compartmentalized. Would you say that's going in the same direction as what your critique of language is?
Yes, and a good analogy for this is the human thought process itself and the actual neural physiology of the brain. You have your right and left brain, right? Let's say an idea is born in the right brain. You have to send it over to the left brain to break it down and analyze it and put it in its parts. This is the solve coagula again. And then you take that idea and you create something with it and you send it back to the right brain for conscious integration. We're stuck in left brain mode right now as a society, and it doesn't want to let go and let that information go back to the right brain to become a finalized product. Now that sounds like horribly good, but okay, I've got a visual aid here. This helps, believe it or not. Okay, if you take just your basic Judeo-Christian concept of the universe, right here, this is a hair thing. Right here, you've got the Garden of Eden, right? On this looks like DNA. I don't think that's an accident. Here's the Garden of Eden. We're blissfully ignorant. We had the fall into linguistic consciousness. So we're down here at the bottom right now. We have to turn and go back up to the other side, which is a very hard-earned but blissful wisdom rather than a blissful ignorance. So right now, if we're at the bottom, we have a lot of work to do and we're being lazy and we're not doing it. And I think the written word is part of the reason we're stuck at the bottom. And that's not to say it doesn't have its value. It most certainly does. But if you're not actively engaging with it, you lose that value. I had something I could have read about that. Of course, I dropped
It's
on
disappeared.
No, it's here somewhere.
Do you have, as you look for that, do you have ideas on, you're a mother yourself, how you would teach children to approach stories and language so that they have a deeper appreciation of that experience?
Okay, here's an example. The last chapter of the Odyssey, he has this challenge for the suitors. You have to string my bow and shoot here and there, and then you can have my wife. That's a terrible shortened version of it. But if you've never had your hands on a bow, you don't know why this is a significant thing to do. It is not easy to string a bow. So like with your kids, read them that story or tell it to them. Even better, tell it to them when you're out on a hike or something and give them a bow and see if they can string it. They're going to get cocky like little boys do. Oh, this is easy. 30 minutes later, you're laughing and their hands hurt and they still haven't managed to do it because they don't know the trick. There's just a very simple trick to it, but it involves your legs. It's kind of, you got to weave it around and then bam, you got the string on there. But if you don't know how to do that, you're going to be messing with this bow for half an hour and then you're just going to throw it away and get mad. But that is a good way to teach your kids to engage with the text. And that's the kind of thing I wanted to do with just teaching, like if I had actually gotten my PhD. And, you know, they said you can't take them out and do things like that because insurance wouldn't let you. I mean, really? Is that the world we live in? Oh, it's so frustrating.
Yeah, I know I'm no expert on it, but I've read that there's been a movement in the German-speaking countries of Europe, Germanic-speaking Switzerland, Austria, and Germany itself, movement towards these really hands-on schools. Now, who knows? Again, you know, chat. We expect nuance here. Doesn't mean that I'm promoting these schools. Don't go look them up and then find that they're like leftist indoctrination camps. I'm not saying that I looked up every last bit of information about it. I'm just saying I'm aware that there are schools in German-speaking Europe where we can at least give kudos to this aspect of it, even if there's other aspects we might not like, which is when they learn about trees, they go out and touch these trees, different species of trees. They're out pretty much unless there's a lightning storm and it's dangerous to be outside. They're out in all weather in all seasons. So dare I ask what you think about our modern education system of still in most of our schools today, all the kids sit in little rows and desks for hours.
I think it's terrible for them. I really do. They tried to put my kids on anti-hyper meds, and that's not going to happen. Because they're normal. Kids don't want to sit there all day. That's not normal. I was lucky. I went to a very small private school, and we had a lot of land. The neighbors had horses. We were outside all the time, and our teachers took us out, and we did interactive things. And we could get that energy out and still learn. And I think that's wonderful for especially smaller children. Now, of course, as you get older, some kids do really well with this sitting down with a book. Some kids don't, which is why a small school is better because you can cater to those individual kids. Homeschool is amazing. If that's your only option, I would do it. But these huge schools where everybody's supposed to be the same, I think it's soul killing. For a lot of kids, it's not good for them at all. Then you got kids like mine who go to school because they want to cause trouble. But what are you going to do? I find them humorous.
Well, we're glad you didn't put them on the meds.
Yeah.
No. That's a whole nother can of worms we won't get into. But big pharma, awful.
Yeah, I know that. I've also seen some work about kids doing really well when they teach each other, when it's group and it's interactive. There's a video you can find. Maybe I'll do something on it eventually. TEKOS, TEKOS school system in Russia. Now, of course, we'll be accused of being Russian agents or something like that. But yeah, the whole industrial way of teaching kids. I mean, the system we have now really it did come up in at the time of the Industrial Revolution, right? The whole thing was to get them used to 3 meals a day and that whole like working in a factory.
Right.
Schools like factories, and that's still what we have today. And as you just indicated, we know that little boys are treated like broken girls if they're rambunctious or boyish in any way, and then given all these meds. It's just crazy. So let's you talked about that spiral you were just showing, right? Let's relate that to people's experience of time as well, because in your notes you told us something about Kairos and Chronos, and that sounded pretty fascinating. So what are these two different experiences of time that you delineate?
Chronos is going to be your fragmented time. Like if you look at a clock, you see all the little segments, not a digital clock, obviously, but you've got the minutes, the seconds, the hours, and it just goes round and round. That's your fragmentation. That's the tick-tock. That's the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeping this petty pace from day to day. That's Chronos. Kairos is going to be a wholeness as opposed to a fragmentation. This is when you're in the moment and time ceases to exist, in a manner of speaking. Let's say you're having a really good time and several hours pass before you realize it. That would be your Kairos. So this modern world with our schedules and our get this done, get that done, da-di-da-di-da, that's very Chronos, which is another name for Saturn. So you could call the modern world very Saturnian. And I don't think that's a coincidence either, but we won't get into that. We'll get in trouble.
Begs more. That begs some questions. What about, all right, what is your take on, is any of the march of technology, is it all bad? Where's the balance? Do you want to go live in the woods? So
yes.
where do we put where do we put you on that scale?
Technology is not all bad, and that's exactly the thing. You see, nothing is all bad, and that's how it tricks you. Technology, like what we're doing now, can be a very good thing. But at the same time, let's say our books are increasingly becoming digital, which they are. Now, at some point, are these collective libraries of Alexandria, if you will, going to be burned by wiping a hard drive or dispersing a cloud? And then you also have the Orwellian idea, there's that word again, of simply changing history. If it's digital, you can go back and rewrite it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe 6 months from now, somebody who looked this up is going to come back later and say, oh, I guess I was wrong. Well, because you can literally just change history if that's all that's left. But if you've got a real book, that's not so easy to change. Have you read Fahrenheit 451?
No.
I actually didn't.
Oh, you have to
Believe it
read
or not.
them. So the idea is firemen set fires rather than extinguish them. And
Right.
they set fire to homes that have books in them.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, a fireman, of course, gets curious. He steals a book. He reads it. He becomes in love with the written word. And then he finds out there's a whole underground society. They have escaped to the forest. Certain people have memorized Shakespeare. Others have memorized Homer. Somebody else memorized Livy, or any great work. But that's just it. If you want to keep this, you have to learn it and hold on to it, quite literally, because if it's all digital, it can be gone just like that. So much easier than burning a house down. Just wipe the hard drive.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the danger with having everything digital. If you've got a book, though, yeah, it's pretty easy to hide a book, and it doesn't change.
But to your point, the best thing is that you actually have people who are the holders of the tradition, the keepers of the
Actively
tradition.
engaging, right?
Right.
And that again, that's the difference between the oral and the written. Of course, we all know that the Odyssey, the Iliad, Beowulf even were recited before they were written down. And this is just the way things were back then. And you would have these amazing minds memorizing these huge poems because they have certain patterns, certain repetitions. It makes it easier to memorize. And of course, they spend their whole life learning these. But let's say you go to a dinner theater and you watch a play, listen to a poem. It's more engaging than if you were just sitting at home reading it by yourself.
Right.
And so that was the norm then. You would go to and hear the bard recite these poems, and they would travel around, and that's how they got fed. They would show up at this or that castle and perform the work, and then move on to the next one.
Well, it also feeds the people because that communal experience, you're looking around and you might have, I mean, in the case of Shakespearean theater, certainly the different classes of people, but they're all the same people with a common story and common instincts. And so when you look around and you see that everyone's reacting the same way, getting the same jokes, have the same sensibilities about things, oh, isn't it then much harder to tell those people that there's nothing that binds them,
Mm-hmm.
that they're
Right.
not a people? So what do you think the implications are with everything we're speaking about our people and the damage, the psychological damage that's been done to us, and that whether it's on a small scale, just with parents and children in a home, larger family gatherings, eventually communal gatherings, where would you ideally see the role in public storytelling and performance and any kind of oral tradition to bring back, rehabilitate a sense of our peoplehood?
The oral tradition is important because, like you said, it unites people. It brings them together. Whereas if you are engaging with the text by yourself, whether actively or passively, it isolates.
Yeah.
And we are all far too isolated right now. Even what we're doing, we're in separate states, I presume. I don't think you guys are in the same state. And as nice as this is, it's not the same thing as being in the same room with somebody. It's not that same sense of community. Here in Atlanta, we have the Atlanta Shakespeare Tavern. Now, I can read Macbeth 10 times, but until I go there and I'm having a pint watching Lady Macbeth wipe blood off on her nightgown, that's just not the same thing. And you kind of get this camaraderie with the other people who are in the audience, and sometimes it gets downright rowdy, and they're throwing things and yelling, and just like it was at the Globe. And of course, when you all leave there, you have that sense of community, and it continues. So, like you said, that's a root that you have put down, that it's going to be harder to pull up and manipulate you into, say, just, oh, I'm going to read some African folk tales today, or Russian, or whatever. If you're from this country and this is your story, it's going to be closer to your heart if you have seen it and experienced it in person, if that made any sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely does. Jason, did you have something?
Well, I was actually thinking about Kairos and here we're talking about connecting you and roots being what enables you to preserve yourself and having community, having this, and therefore heritage, and therefore a present and a future. All of this is really resonating with me and kind of coming together as an interesting stew in my thought process. And and what's that? Is that exactly what you were hoping for? The stew? I'm getting scrambled like you had wanted to have happen to your readers. But and one place as I'm following, I feel like I'm curious. I want to ask a question about is this Kairos. This is not necessarily something, but certainly you could be in the room with somebody. You could be engaging in a text. You could be engaging. Part of that could be the story that is orally shared, and the time then could sweep right on by. You'd have no concept of how much time really went by. But this is also something that has a reverse side to it, in that you can be engaged in something horrible or something you'd rather not do, and time sweep on by and you're losing all of the time. So do you have any thoughts to that, or would you like to speak to that?
I find that when you're engaged in something you don't want to be involved in, time actually slows down significantly. Like if you're at work, I swear last week I looked at the clock 3 times and it was 10:30 for like 4 hours.
You see it move backwards, move back. Well, no, I'm thinking more along the lines of maybe not so much overly objectionable, but when when a person has a lot of things to do, suddenly the amount of time, stressed, yes, the amount of time you have to do it seems to absolutely evaporate.
Right.
So there does seem to be another side to this, where it can be something.
At the same time, while we're stressing, like if you've got to move or something, and the time seems to evaporate, you're still constantly thinking about time. Kairos is the absence of that thought. Like you're just not even worried about it. You don't hear the tick-tocking of the clock. You're not worried about it going fast or slow. You're not worried about it at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a blissful state. Whereas Chronos is, whether time is fast or slow, you're obsessing over time and thinking about it, and you're hearing that clock going in your head, tick tock, and that'll make you nuts after a while.
Yeah, been there. Well, actually, that's a great clarification. Actually, that's really interesting. Jared, what do we have?
Well, that's the ecstatic state, right? When you're meditative, or certainly if you're creative and you're writing something, creating music, working on a painting, you can get swept away. Love making in its best form.
And you're like, I can't stand up.
But and I am a fan of Kairos more than Chronos, trust me, being a creative guy myself. But I know, and I was getting at this a little bit earlier, I guess, okay, I'm trying to frame this especially for our people, for our circles. So you're going to have people who say, look, our ability to measure time and plan for the future is what created Western civilization, what we're sitting in, how we're able to speak to each other on computers. And I know I'm not putting words in your mouth. I know you, of course, said there's nuance to it. It's not like it's all bad. But I'm just trying to play devil's advocate and think, what is the person who is more, maybe looks at this a little more askance, a little more critically, and says, look, all this Kairos stuff might sound nice, but when you have, people need to eat and trains need to run on time. Jason and I do like trains running on time. We were talking about that recently. You need the planning and the precision of, and white people are actually pretty good at that. And so is that part of our nature itself a two-edged sword? Because admittedly, I don't come down strictly on one side or the other of this. It's very funny to me how our circles love to critique the modern world when it suits us, but we also love to say that everything's wrong about the modern world. So it's like we invented the modern world, but this modern world of clocks and measures and numbers and quantities is soul crushing. So which one is it? I think we need to have an internal conversation as people of European descent. I'm very serious about that, putting our finger on that a little bit better, because I'm calling out our own guys now. Some people out there in social media land, they try to play both sides of that. So I think we need to get a little more clarity around this.
I think what we need is balance. Just like with the technology, you have your good, you have your bad, and you need to really think about what you're doing and use it appropriately. Now, if you're obsessing with time, that's detrimental to your health. It's going to cause stress and whatnot. At the same time, if you're off in flaky la la land all the time, you're not going to have such a good life. If you are always in that carpe diem moment, your future.
I think that mic's running away from you.
Sorry, I keep hitting it.
See that mic is on. It's on Kairos time. It's on its own time.
That's right.
The mic is just doing what it wants. It's very in the moment.
Okay. I'm gonna try to control myself.
All right, I think that's a little better.
Balance is the key. You have to. It's like planning a vacation. We have to plan for it in order to forget about time for a while, and then you have to go back to work. You just have to. But there's a balance there. Like you can really obsess over something and still not get anything done, or you can approach it calmly and analytically. Do this, and this, get it done, and then go to the beach or the forest, go for a walk. You have to have a balance. You have to have your days off where you go out in the woods and walk for 6 hours and don't worry about things. But if you did that every day, you would run out of food. So yeah, you have to do both. You're right. But
I agree. I mean, balance is one of I use the word all the time. So do you think we've gotten to, you said that we're left brain, so I'm assuming you think that our culture, our modern world has become way too in the Chronos side of things.
Right. Yes. Right.
And if anything,
right brain.
If anything, with the white mind, is that would be the way that it would be imbalanced. I don't think that we don't come from climates, and we don't have the biology in the brain to be going the other way, I think.
Right.
Like that's more of a tropical culture thing.
Exactly. Like if winter is coming, to use a very trite phrase, you have to plan for it. You got to get those veggies in the jars and put them in the root cellar, or you're going to starve.
Here's an off-the-cuff question. Then. Do you think the modern white people who look to India and Asia and even Africa sometimes and say, oh, like they're more authentic, we need to be more like them, is that a latent, unconscious realization that maybe we just need a little more balance? It's internal, of course. We don't have to look to these other cultures. We certainly don't have to fetishize other cultures like these people do. I've been very critical of that. But do you think that even though it expresses in a very, well, we'll say less than ideal way, that there is something to that instinct, and maybe we shouldn't just write all those people off as hippies that are out of touch or something like that? Do you think their instincts are in the right place?
I would say that issue is multifaceted, like any other. I don't know that it's a time issue per se, but if you
consciousness and integrated consciousness,
right? If you look at like say the shamanic tradition, that was broken in white culture. We don't really have elders that we can turn to. Whereas in India, Africa, and other places like that, they do. Their culture was not necessarily broken like that. Like here in the States, you can go out west and sit down in what are the sweat teepee things? I forgot what they're called.
Sweat lodge, yeah.
Sweat lodge, thank you. Like that's an unbroken tradition. You can experience that, but then you need to back up and realize that is what you have lost from your culture, and try to get that back.
Mm-hmm.
Like my generation, we don't have elders per se. This goes back to World War II. Like my grandfathers were absolutely broken by that.
Mm-hmm.
And their wives, that was the first generation of women who expected to work. And it was just a mess. Like my parents' generation, that's the first generation to get televisions. The first generation to be introduced to the idea of free love. Like the propaganda hit them from every conceivable angle, and it never stopped. And there was no internet then. They didn't know what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, imagine that. Now we can look back on that and criticize them, but that's not exactly fair given that what their parents went through and barely survived. Some of them didn't survive. And then you've got the so-called boomers. And yeah, there's a lot of problems that came out of that generation, but you also have to think of all that got thrown at them. Our culture was broken right around the turn of the 20th century. I'd say here with the Civil War. So we have to become the elders that we have lost. And if it takes a trip to India to wake that up in you, then go.
But don't stay there.
That's not your culture. You just,
don't.
But then apply it to your own life and your own people.
Yeah. And as you well know, there are people trying to bring that back as best they can.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll point out, as you said, look, sometimes people look at that stuff because that's where they're starting. But ultimately, there's that phrase, drink from your own well. And Stephen McNallen talks about how he had people come to him because the sweat lodges you're talking about out west in the American West would eventually get to a point where they would say to the white people, all right, it's been nice. You've been hanging out with us here and doing this little retreat, but now we're going to do something just for us, just for our tribe. And you have to leave now. Yeah. And they were like, oh, did I do something wrong? Was I impolite? And they're like, no, you didn't do anything wrong. This isn't for you, though. This isn't your people. This is for our people. And McNallen talks about how the fact that a lot of people have come his way because they got that response from their, new agey out west Amerindian dance retreats, and then ended up. Well, I'm not trying to belittle it, but then ended up at looking at the European roots. So if they ended up there, then that's a good thing. Not everyone makes that journey, but we're all trying to do our part to make people know that exists. A lot of our people, as you said, these are broken traditions now, and a lot of people don't even know how to follow those roots where they go back to.
Right.
I think that's why going back to primary sources is so important.
Yes.
Like take the Eddas, for instance. Yeah, they were written down by a Christian monk, but that's all we have to go on. You have to accept it, take it, or leave it. But that's as close to that source as you're going to get. So if that's all you have, then run with it. Like the Beowulf, for instance, I actually have translated that from the Old English, and that's a whole different experience than just reading it in a translation. Then you can see the patterns and the alliterations and the repetitions and how that would have been easier to memorize because it's laid out very rhythmically. You don't get that in a translation. So no matter what you're doing, if you're trying to develop roots and get back to source, you have to go back as far as possible. And it's really not that hard to do. And we have this wonderful computer thing, and it goes to every library in the world. You can learn whatever you want, and people watch cat bloopers.
Yes, that's what they're watching.
Yeah. At first I thought you said tap bloopers. Maybe we have to do you read Beowulf in Old English? I just want to make sure I heard that correctly. Yeah. That's the important thing. Stephen Flowers talks about how when he studied Germanic culture, he had to study Old Norse, he had to study Old German, he had to study contemporary German, and he talks about how kids now in similar degree programs where they're left, because a lot of them have dried up, they now say, oh, well, they don't have to start knowing Old Norse and Old German because it's just too much of an ask. And it's like,
it's a dead language.
These are our scholars, and that's too much of an ask that you're going to be carrying on this tradition and you're not even learning Old Norse and Old German. That's insane. But that's another example of exactly what you're saying, of all of this being broken and things being made too easy.
Well, we have to break it and make it easy so that everybody can pass. That's the idea there. But that is not what happens here on tap. We are, however, rapidly running out of time with our wonderful guests. So before we are out of time, I want everybody to know that even though we have been demonetized here on YouTube, you can still financially gift over on Ko-fi, Cash App, and Entropy. If you have any questions or statements and you want them to be read, that is a surefire way to have them read before we wrap up, which will be coming up here soon, ladies and gentlemen. And before we do that, though, let me also mention that if you have a question or statement otherwise, tag Jared and myself in the live chat so that we can see these questions for Rachel. And what I would really like you to do now, young lady, is give us an overview of your series here of these 5 novels, and then specifically focus in on the current one, the brand new one, and let people know exactly how exciting these things are going to be, how interesting they are, how much time that they will just spend, that will just, by way of Kairos, will fly by, and they have no idea how much time has gone by while they're reading your works. Please take it away.
Alrighty, the first book is Condemnation with an A. This is a modern day Joan of Arc. She is involved in a biker war, believe it or not. I take the 15th century and just lay it on top of modern day New Orleans, and it works beautifully. You've got men, metal, and leather, and just
nice.
Both centuries. Yes, it's perfect. The whole idea with all the books here is it's a soul's journey, and a lot of these characters are allegorical, like the Everyman plays in medieval lit. Everyman was the guy's name, and he represents every man. So my characters represent the different stages of the soul as it evolves. So like Joan of Arc would be your warrior saint, like these archetypes. So the next book would be The Twisted Rib. And this is about a mythical house of ill repute. It is modeled on the Judeo-Christian universe, like literally the architecture. You have different floors representing different layers of the cosmos. Now, the house doesn't actually exist. It is in what the Celtics would call the Hallows, which if you envision an hourglass, you've got both ends. You've got our world, the spirit world, and that little bit in between, that's where the house is. And the women who work there are biblical characters. And it's
I'm looking for some real estate right about there.
If you're not,
that's kind of where I live.
Oh, New Orleans, really? Well, if
no. I mean the little in between spot.
Okay. Now, if you're not to see the house, you never will. You'll walk right through it and not have any idea what you've done. But the women are they're kind of like reincarnations, or are they the Fae? Are they angels? What are they? I don't know. That's for the reader to decide. The next book is Godless. That is about a 17th century witch trial in which a very famous priest is accused of possessing an entire convent and driving them into an absolute frenzy. There have been a few movies about it. The priest's name is Urbain Grandier. It takes place in France. And every other chapter is a character from the first book who was almost murdered by Bluebeard, Joan of Arc's general. She ends up in an insane asylum, and she is researching this witchcraft trial and telling the story. And so every other chapter is her in the hospital versus the Inquisitors. And I use that to compare modern psychology to the Inquisition, because that's a bad industry. Let's just put it that way. The fourth book is The Forgetting, and that is about Joan's girlfriend of sorts, a historical character that was just barely mentioned in a couple of the primary sources. Her name is Charlotte.
We spoke about that on your first tap.
Yes. She sees Joan burned and goes on a pilgrimage of sorts, and it's a cross-country backpacking, hitchhiking. And throughout this story, she talks to different characters and brings out very pertinent modern issues like gay rights, immigration, Islam, all these sorts of things. The Oklahoma bombing, because she's in Oklahoma. So it just goes through a whole gamut of controversial issues, and she ends up actually getting murdered at the end. It's not a spoiler. But there's a very familiar group that dresses in black and disrupts right-wing events that does her in San Diego. And that leads up to the fifth book, which is about to be released, because the narrator in that book meets Charlotte right before she dies and actually takes her manuscript from her body. She saw her kills and publishes that book. And the fifth book is the one that she writes while she's on her way to meet her. So that's The Forsaken. And that's when the seven saviors come into play. You've all probably familiar with the medieval version of the Mary Magdalene story. That's who this character is. She leaves the house from the second book and wanders into the desert and becomes a saint, just like in the medieval lore. And at the end, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Forsaken, the current book that we've been focusing on that deals so much in language, meeting the seven savers, is that about to come out, or is that already available?
It will be out, I'm hoping, Ostara, which is March 19th. So just a few more weeks. It's done. I'm just did it again. She's I'm fine-tuning like little spelling errors and stupid things. Changing adjectives back and forth 10 times because I'm not sure what I want to say.
But it'll be available very soon. And where this is a very interesting sounding series. Where can people find this again, these books?
Right now, they're only on Amazon, and I'm looking at Lulu. If anybody has any recommendations, I'd love to hear them. I'm also thinking about just getting my own website and making them downloadable as ebooks for free, because I don't make any money doing this anyway. And if people want to donate, they can donate. If they don't want to or can't, that's fine too. I make less than $1 on Amazon per book, which is kind of ridiculous. They keep the rest. So as far as I'm concerned, if you want the book, send me a message. I'll send you a PDF. That's fine.
And definitely, before we wrap up here, and we did have a couple of questions that came in, but I would like you to be able to just reflect on the current book that's about to come out. What is something that you absolutely, or what several things do you absolutely want to convey to folks while you have their attention right now about this book, why they should read it?
This is a modern day pilgrimage of sorts. It's a going from a corrupted life in the modern world and all that we see, all the degeneracy and so on, and going on like this pilgrimage through the desert, which is a place of cleansing, if you will, meeting all of these religious figures, really breaking down these different faiths and analyzing them, and then coming out on the other side of the country, literally, to meet the final savior, who kind of brings it all to a head. And I won't tell you what happens at the end, but there's an explosion in a very famous city. And a god is freed from underneath a very famous wall. And that god is like the macrocosmic image of man. We've all heard that human beings are the microcosm of the divine. So the idea is to know the self and free the God within. And that's where excuse me for saying it, the horror imagery comes in. This is symbolic of the fallen soul of man. It's not a physical thing, but what you're doing is pulling yourself out of the material and back into the spiritual. Again, with my little spiral hair thing. You're down here at the bottom, so you want to climb back up. So that's what we're trying to do. We got a long way.
Brilliant. I think you definitely intrigued some people with that last little bit of information right there. Very interesting. Yes, you got my attention.
We'll put links, if you're listening back, on our websites. Go support Rachel. If you purchase and enjoy her books, or if you get a free download, if she sets that up, definitely support her. All of our people working hard. It's not easy to go write 5 books, come up with these ideas, weave all of these philosophies together, tell it in a narrative, and offer it to you. Just offer it to you. So with Rachel, with other people who are our artists, our culture makers, support them, as we always encourage you to do so here. Jason, do we have any feedback from the audience? Any questions before we start wrapping up?
Well, I will swing the mic over here for a moment. We do indeed. We definitely have a lot of people who really like Rachel, and I think we're going to be seeing some sales. And this is absolutely echoing what Mr. George just said, and that is that there is absolutely in no way, shape, or form any support shaming in service to white well-being. So when artists create work, especially when they have created it and it has taken this much time, this much research, this much dedication, it is entertaining, you might not exactly think that you're the kind of person who can sit down and read a book. Maybe you haven't read one in 10 years, but it is worthwhile to show some appreciation and pick up the book. I would buy it as a printed book rather than just an ebook, and put it on your shelf. And maybe one of these days you'll get up the courage to break it open and you'll thoroughly enjoy it. You'll find that you fall back in love with reading. But absolutely show your appreciation for the work that this young lady has put together. It's very interesting. It's intriguing. I'm going to be reading this 5th installment now about this, finding out about this God coming out from underneath. This is very exciting. But let's jump over to entropy and see what we have. Very early in the show today, we had Tall Kevin. Great to see you, good brother, in the questions widget. And thank you all who have jumped over to entropy to watch the show. And Kevin says here, Rachel, why do you feel some authors augment books by omitting or adding their own feelings on the topic? Do you feel it's mainly the author's vanity or politically motivated?
Yes, and all of the above. I think authors augment with their personal views because you have to write from your own experience. You can't very well talk about something if you don't have some sort of an involvement with it. That can be politically motivated, it can be spiritually motivated, it can be a negative or a positive thing. But I think any author has to write from within, or the text just feels hollow. If that helps.
I couldn't agree more. And
like my characters, for instance, are a little bit of me, a little bit of history, a little bit of other people I've met, and then just some things I made up along the way. So it's a combination. And I would imagine that most authors of fiction anyway are the same way. And even nonfiction to some extent, if you're interpreting a historical event, you honestly can't help but put a little bit of yourself into it. Because maybe you think X, Y, and Z is more important than A, B, and C, so you're going to write about that more. And I don't know that you could even get away from something like that. I don't know that there's any truly objective writer in existence.
Right. If you wouldn't be human, if you could.
No. And would you want to read a book by a robot? I don't think it would be very good.
I would not want to read it. Kevin, but if you also are curious, when you are publishing with one of the big publishing houses, there absolutely are sociopolitical criteria that you have to meet as an author to be published. And it is all vehemently anti-white. They want to see the trans this, the homosexual that, the promotion of biological white erasure, and they just want to see it all. And the more points that you're able to hit, the more likely you are to get the nod. So we have here the financial gift over on Entropy for $50. Thank you so very much. By a name here, Expose the Nose. Thank you so much for that. 50.
You will like my book, sir.
Yes. Make sure you get Rachel Summers' book at $50 here. And writing with this question, look at the Atlantean Gardens latest video. So perhaps this is a YouTube channel.
It's good.
It's good.
Got some good stuff.
All right. There is an interesting Russian ruble bill that in that video from 1917. Robert Safir is, in my beliefs, a white well-being person. 6:15 intro of the video. I didn't know that before I saw that today. Crazy. Well, I have no idea. So I'm brand new to it, and I'll have to take a look.
He's an anthropologist. He's very careful, but if you listen carefully, you'll get what he's saying. He's good.
Okay. Well,
I know our friend Liv is a fan of his, and some people have suggested we try to get him on. Yeah,
that would
a little
be
more
awesome.
Conjecture. I don't know where to, like, what criteria I would have to assess his work, but I've listened to a few things, and it's interesting food for thought.
Do we have is it on YouTube? Is that what it is? Because we have.
He's on YouTube, yeah.
So it's Atlantean Gardens on YouTube.
Yeah, Rachel, I've let separate plays a part of my brain where I just let him wash there in the Kairos, like we were talking about before. It's like, all right, I'll take that in. I don't know where he's getting all this, but okay. Sometimes you just have to let something wash over you and not immediately form an opinion about it.
Well, I've experienced Kairos today because we have already, I mean, it's just like the blink of an eye, and we have already gone beyond our hour with the fair lady. And so I want to thank everyone who showed up today for this wonderful tap with Rachel Summers. We'll have her back because she just is a genius. She keeps writing and it's fantastic works. And this is a lady who has also worked with her hands. And she's not against getting dirty, and as well as looking lovely. Look at the wonderful long hair. So she's hitting all of them. She's smart, lovely, and will even get her hands into a Harley Davidson and make it purr just right. So it's been an exciting time together. Rachel, why don't you let everyone know where they can find you, where they can find your works, where they can find your blog, everything that you're up to, and what you are going to be working on next, please.
What comes next is the 6th book in the series, which will be the final book. This is where we put back all the broken pieces. It will be called The Forbidden, to go along with the Forgetting, the Forsaken, and the Forbidden.
Nice.
You can find me on Twitter at SummerSoleil156. That's Soleil as in sunshine, Soleil. You can find me Rachel Summers Literature on Facebook. And if you want to buy actual books, you can go to Amazon. Just do Rachel Summers Forgetting, because if you just put in my name, you're going to get all sorts of X-Men stuff.
Okay.
So you have to do one of the book titles, and then you can find me. And if you look under the book title, it'll have my name. You can click on that, and it'll go to my author page. But that's about it.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Mr. George.
If you want to hear a little more about Rachel's background and being a motorcycle mechanic as well, that's what Jason.
That was not a successful venture.
Well, that's what Jason was referring to.
I could write the book. Like, I went to school and then I worked at a Harley shop for a year just so I could write the book and kind of learn about that culture, because I'm not Hunter S. Thompson. I'm not going to go running around with the Hells Angels. It's not a good idea, especially for a female. Not a good plan. So I took the safer route and got a job at a Harley shop, because that's kind of like sacred ground. You don't do your fighting and whatnot at the Harley place. You do that across the street or whatever. But if you work there, the guys there look out for you. It's a good place. Well, I learned a lot.
Well, we still respect and appreciate that you went and worked there for a year to write that book. And if anyone wants to hear about that, as mentioned at the beginning of this episode, Rachel has been on tap before. She was on last January 2019. So as always, go to theafterparty.tv, type in Rachel Summers into that little nifty magnifying glass icon, the search bar. I don't want to hear more people saying to Jason and I, have you had so-and-so on? You know, go to the TAP site and see for yourself. We have a deep catalog of all these great shows saved for you, properly annotated so that you can click around the tags and see what other shows have those subjects. It's all there for you. Speaking of a library, that's it. That we have the TAP library, and it's ever expanding. And there's our newsletter, so sign up for that too. Other than that, my site's thegreatorder.com. I have a YouTube channel as well. It's been a little quiet, not many original videos. That might change soon, though. Of course, I do my Red Ice stuff, working on the next one. All kinds of things going on. If you want a review of the amazing year that Jason and I have had from last February to this February, when we just celebrated our 2nd birthday last week, listen to After Hours from a few nights ago, where we just kind of did a victory march and contemplated all the stuff going on. Sometimes you need to take a step back and assess that, and we were happy to celebrate that with you all, because there's a lot going on in our community, and it'll definitely white pill you and inspire you to hear some of the things going on. And if you want to hear more other people doing things, listen to our birthday stream, because a lot of our guests are like Rachel here, ambitious with 6 books, the 6th one now in the works already. There's so many people who we know and we associate with who are doing just fantastic, ambitious projects. It was just one after the other on the birthday stream last week. Also hearing about stories they were relating, how people in their lives are waking up more and more every day, coming around to the reality of the situation and how we see the world. So listen to those 2 last streams if you need some lifting up. Of course, please share them around, share them with friends and family, share on social media. It helps us very much. But until next time, I hand it to Jason to take us out. We love you all, and we'll see you soon.
And something we're absolutely going to do is we're not going to wait a year to have Rachel back again. That is criminal. We'll have you back on to talk about some. Now, maybe as your books relate to some of the current news that we're seeing, especially as things increasingly get bizarre.
Absolutely.
Bizarro world. So we'll have you back before, you don't have to write a book every time. We'll have you back before then.
That's a pretty high price of entry to tap. You have to write a book.
Yeah. I could do it. It wouldn't be a good book, but I could do it.
No, it'll be fantastic. So thank you so much. Let me spotlight a few people. We saw Gaius Caesar, Rosie Clown, Dick Justice. Sounds like it could be a nickname. What is this? Anders Pack and White Wellbeing. Of course, we love that name. Great to see you all. Thanks to everyone who participated in the live chat today. A big welcome to everybody who was watching live or who will watch this in replay and be absolutely thrilled and become a channel member and wants to see more of Rachel and the work that Jared and I are doing. We thank you all. And I want to absolutely thank, of course, before we tap out here, the magnificent Ray for modding today all by himself. But it's okay because he handles those 6-shooters in both hands just fine, the metaphorical 6-shooters. So we appreciate you, Ray. Thank you for all the hard work that you are doing. And ladies and gentlemen, we look forward to seeing you all again next time.